Okay, and then I'm gonna pin you. I'm gonna pin me. I'm gonna pin Tia. There you are. And then Todd, where are you? Todd, do you want me to pin you from the beginning or at the end?
At the end, let's do it at the end.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, nice. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so happy to welcome you today to the fourth talk in our Mindfulness and Anti-Racism series. We've been doing these ones for about, well, almost 2 years with the support from the CRE, the Center for the Study of Race, Ethnicity and Equity. And today we have the support from the Brown School, and the Assembly series has always supported our work and disseminated it. So we are extremely grateful. My name is Diana Parra, and I am a research assistant professor at the Brown School. I will open this space by doing a land acknowledgement, and then I will introduce Tia, who will be introducing Marisela. So the Brown School at Washington University in St. Louis is located on the ancestral lands of the Osage, Missouri, and Illini people who were removed unjustly, and that we in this community are the beneficiaries of that removal. We honor them as we live, work, and study here in St. Louis. Indigenous peoples have inhabited Missouri since time immemorial. Today, there are over 183,400 Native Americans living in the state. So thank you for that. Tia is a lecturer in the Brown School at Washington University in St. Louis. She is also faculty advisor for the Office of Field Education. Tia has more than 20 years of professional experience in leadership, redesigning systems and activating partnerships to advance social justice and equity. In her role with the Office of Field Education, she directs that focus towards the children, youth, and family concentration. Previously, Tia served as Associate Director of the Clark Fox Policy Institute and was Manager of Equity and Inclusion Initiatives for the Brown School. At the Clark Fox Policy Institute, she helped establish and steer the Institute's mission, advance social, economic, and racial justice for children and the adults who care for them. Tia has made significant contributions to centering equity and inclusion as a core commitment of the Brown School, and she has co-lead for the school's equity, inclusion, and diversity strategic initiatives, co-created and facilitated a new learning opportunity for staff and faculty, and supervised racial equity fellows. She also represents the school on Washington University's Equity and Inclusion Council. So I couldn't think of a better person from our group, from our mindfulness working group, who puts together this series to introduce Marisela today. So the floor is yours, Tia.
Thank you. That was a very generous introduction, and I appreciate you so much for leading so much of this work. I also, if you don't mind, I'd like to add to our land acknowledgement and also acknowledge, especially given our speaker today, I would like to also acknowledge enslaved Africans and any populations who were forcefully brought to the United States and exploited for their labor in their lives. Through our acknowledgements, we hope to remind ourselves of the enduring legacy of colonialism, diaspora, enslavement, and genocide and oppression that is part of all of our shared history, and one that continues to impact us today, which really brings us to today, right? So again, my name is Tia. I am a lecturer, a lifelong learner, an aspiring peace builder. And so I'm so honored to have the pleasure of introducing our esteemed guest and speaker, Marisela Gomez. Marisela Gomez is a community activist, author, public health scholar, practitioner, and physician scientist. She holds multiple degrees, including a Master's of Public Health, MD, and a PhD. She has spent more than 20 years engaged in social justice activism, community building, health research, and practice. Some of her most notable work includes working on leading the SAVE Middle East Action Committee, which led to her book, Race, Class, Power, and Organizing in East Baltimore, Rebuilding Abandoned Communities in America. She is a mindfulness practitioner in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh's Order of Interbeing and has studied and practiced mindfulness and other forms of meditation across the globe, from Nepal, Malaysia, Thailand, Colombia, Belize, France, and the United States. If you haven't had the chance, please, we encourage you to watch her TEDx talk, Overcoming Racism for Individual and Collective Wellbeing, in which she addresses what is necessary to overcome the history of racism, segregation, and violence for the collective well-being of our country. From her roots as a Belize-born Afro-Latina to her advocacy efforts in the Baltimore community, Gomez is a force for peace, healing, and liberation. We welcome her today in her talk, Teaching to Transform, Awareness as a Path to Social Justice. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed speaker, who will talk to us today about how we transform the legacy of an unevenly developed society, harness mindfulness as a healing tool, and sustain the energy and presence to re-educate ourselves and our communities. I'm so grateful you're here today. Marisela Gomez.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the wonderful, beautiful introduction. Sometimes I hear the words and I'm not quite sure who that is. I think it's good. I think it's good we don't attach so much to the words and the labels, don't you? So welcome, everyone, and I hope we can, I hope we can work together today. I'm going to be inviting you to do a little bit of practice. So before I go to the PowerPoint slides, I'm going to ask if, just raise your hand if you practice mindfulness. Yeah, okay. So those on the mute, and yeah, okay, great. So I can see the little mechanical hands. All right, great. Because it'll help me in how I talk about what it means to practice, right? And certainly don't need to be practicing in order to participate as well. All right, so let me share screen. All right. There we go. So can you all see the strip of blocks on the right, or you see the full slide? The full slide, excellent. Full slide. Full slide, great. All right. So I'm looking at my watch to make sure I keep in mind the time. So I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about teaching to transform and what that means for me. It may mean something similar for you, it may not. Maybe it can be something you can think about. If it doesn't, maybe you'll take pieces of it that you need and fit it into your practice and your teaching. And maybe you won't take any of it, and that's all good too. You take what you need and you leave what you don't, right? And the whole understanding here is that we practice using mindfulness and awareness as a path to this transformation to a more just society, a more racially equitable society, more gender non-discriminating society, a more non-biased against immigrant society, non-biased against queer, trans, and all the folks who are, say, different from what the power hierarchies suggest needs to be the right way to be in the world. And so recently I've started to put some space between my name and the degrees. I think it's a healthy thing, actually, because it's that practice of humility, and it's a practice of that we're more than these labels and what those labels mean, to just continuously be interrogating and looking into it. No, don't get too caught up, y'all. Not good. All right. So I want to talk in this context here, and it's a structure to share, and even as I reviewed it this morning, I thought, I don't know, I don't like this one here, the third one here, maybe it should be here, and I think what that means, and what I find that means usually. When I've prepared a talk and then gone back and thought about it, it usually means that they really inter-are, right? That they're not solidly separate, even though I'm artificially separating it into these four ways, like byte amounts, so to speak. But I'm going to try to do that and follow that. And I'm also inviting you to not get caught up in that either. Okay. But it's a good way to just have a path forward, right? And that is pausing, right? This is how we teach, right? I'm suggesting this is a way to teach about transformation and social justice. Pausing, be in awareness of who you are, who's the teacher, and who's listening in what you're teaching. And then the recognition of the context that we live in a very unjust society. I don't care how you package it. We're going to talk about that. And so that's a realization that needs to be brought forth more often in teaching. I don't care where you teach. We need to start being truth seekers and truth tellers. And it's a sad thing that in education, we haven't been really truth tellers, which is part of the problem, isn't it? We've co-created what we are living now by not being quite truthful. And then the last part is the emergence. This emergence that occurs if we're following these steps in how we're teaching. This emergence, this transformation that occurs, right? So I'm going to be channeling some folk. I hope you're okay with that language, meaning that I'm going to be calling on them, ancestors, and I'm going to be offering some of their words and in quotes, and so they're going to hold this with us. It's a co-creation, right? Nobody does anything by themselves. For me to think that this is all this is all my knowledge would be quite something, wouldn't it? Yeah. And so I think you know who everyone is, but just to make sure, Dr. Martin Luther King, Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh. We also know Gloria Anzola, doctor, and also Audre Lorde, all who have since passed, and all who have left quite a legacy, on whose shoulders we stand to teach us about transformation. Each one of these folks their pedagogy was spirit and action for a better society, and to bring them into the space is already to invite them to be with us and to share with us is already, I think, something. So the pedagogy of pausing. So what we're going to do, in the way I usually offer any kind of talk or presentation, is every 4 or 5 or 6 slides of content material, you'll see a blank slide. And in this case, it's going to be a slide with these little geese flying in the air. And then you'll see a slide of nature after that. So there may be content slide like this here, the pedagogy of pausing. And then there'll be a slide of nature. This is like every 5 or 6 slides, something like that. And then there'll be this slide. So blank slide, full on nature slide. And my invitation for everyone is, if you have a piece of paper, to, when we come to this slide, this blank slide, to notice, take a breath and notice what's going on in your body and mind right now. Right? So breathe in, breathe out, and just get in touch with what's there. What's the energy there? And then, and it's just going to be 5 seconds. It's not going to be a long time, right? And then you'll see the slide of nature. And when you see the slide of nature, take another breath in and notice what's there with that slide of nature, right? So there's always questions about, how do we bring mindfulness into the classrooms or into our teaching environments? How do we actually talk about these hard things about injustice that's so difficult to talk about without triggering folks, without re-traumatizing around the very things we're talking about, right? And so this is part of it, right? Like, how do we teach to transform? That means we are taking into account the whole thing. And that means that we're taking into account in our teaching a way that we can move through these difficulties that we're going to talk about. And so this taking the moment to pause, right? And to notice what's there, and then also to let nature do its thing. So we know that even the sight of nature, what we call nature in outside nature, or a plant, is already starting to shift the energy in our body physiologically, right? The nervous system. And we know when we're outside in nature, it does more, but even a glimpse of an image of nature begins to shift things. And so I can tell you that, and what I'm inviting you to do is to experience it yourself. And one way to do that, because we're so brain focused and we think so much, is to just notice and write it down. Now, pre-COVID, when I was in classrooms more, we would just do it together in the classroom, and I would ask people to give me their sheets of paper at the end. They'd draw a column and put the before the slide, and then the nature and after. And then I would collect those papers. And of course, I saw a trend, right, of after the nature, when people saw the nature slides, there was a shift in the energy in their bodies and their hearts, right? Then we went on to Zoom and COVID, and I had started to do it on asking people to put it in the chat. But what I found is that people are quite shy because the chat identifies you. And so there wasn't as much response. And so now what I've moved to is to invite you to just write it down and notice for yourself. And maybe at the end, if there's time, you can share if you see a pattern for your own self, okay? So I hope that's clear. It's not a big thing. And if you don't want to do it because you just want to chill and not deal with anything, that's cool too. Don't feel you have to. It's good to know, for you to experience yourself what happens for you. Nothing like experiencing practice for your own self to really say, it works. Maybe I'll try it on, right? Okay, so it's an invitation. Okay, so the second part is who is teaching and who is listening. So this understanding that when we're teaching or sharing information, we're bringing all of who we are into the space. Sometimes we don't realize we're doing that. You know, we come from a rough day and we're like right into what we need to do. Sometimes it's a chill day, it's a relaxed day. And there's two different people bringing that same content into the classroom, delivering that same content to the people who are there to learn with us. And yet we're also bringing that energy of who we are. And we're also, not just in that moment, but we're also bringing in our histories in our teaching. Even though we may not sit there and say, I'm so and so with this, this, and this, and I have these things that I haven't, we're still bringing them. And most of the times we don't even know what we're bringing. So it's a really good reflection to really bring ourselves into what we're doing in teaching. If we're teaching to really transform, to really start to know who we are, right? So who's there doing this? Now, here is Gloria Anzaldúa, which is a beautiful quote. So what it says is, the struggle is inner. Chicano, Indio, American Indian, Mojado, Mexicano, immigrant Latino, Anglo in power, working class Anglo, Black, Asian. Our psyches resemble the border towns and are populated by the same people. The struggle has always been inner and is played out in outer terrains. Awareness of our situation must come before inner changes, which in turn come before changes in society. Nothing happens in the real world unless it first happens in the images in our heads. So what I understand that quote to say is that without this real reflection inside that is impacted by what is outside, right? Because it's an engagement. We really aren't able to do the work of transformation outside. It just cannot happen, right? Because what we are is what we bring outside. And what we are is actually impacted by the social environments that we're in, right? For example, for those of you in public health, we know now that 80% of our health is determined by these social determinants, right? These causes outside of our biology or our genes, right? And it's probably more than what I just said. And so who we are and what we've made up and what we're continuing to carry, what we're going to bring forward as we teach and write and share the way that we want folks to learn is going to be impacted directly by our ability to know who we are and how our society has impacted us, right? And that in a way, if we were a planet, it's like what we're taking in, yeah? What we're taking in really makes a big difference in what we're showing up with. And so this invitation then is that we really need to go home and take care of our garden. You know, if we think of ourselves, that everyone is a garden, each of us need to go home and look and see what's in our garden, right? There's weeds in our garden, there's beautiful plants we want to grow big and strong in our garden. And if we leave our garden unattended, the weeds overgrow it, right? We know that, outside garden. And so we're no different, right? What is in us, if we tend to what is in us, we know what is there, and we can decide what we want to grow stronger and what we want to maybe transform. So this whole teaching to transform, it's a huge self-reflection of our own transformation. You know, I would suggest that the real long-term sustainable transformation in society that we're trying to bring about around justice, it will never happen until we ourselves have looked at our own inner transformation. Because we can only bring out outside what's inside of us. And this inability to do our own work really hinders how far we can go in really bringing about societal shifts. So this need to really go home is important. To know what we are, how we show up, as we say, right? Yeah, this just looking, this reflecting, this knowing what's there, what's getting put out there. And we use this mindfulness, right? This mindfulness is this way, right? This reflecting back what's in our garden, what is there, how is society impacting us, right? This awareness of what's there, that we have a clear comprehension, right? And so for those of you who are familiar with mindfulness, or those of you who aren't, we understand, and there's a good number of descriptions of mindfulness, and so there's a few here for us, so no one gets upset that the one they might be keen about is not here, and I might be missing some also. So mindfulness and this awareness, clear comprehension, right? Keeping something in mind, a framework, and usually we say it's an ethical framework, how we want to live our lives, right? So we keep this in mind. This is always in our mind, right? As this background kind of like walking with us everywhere we go, right? We have this framework. And then we're present to what's in front of us as well, right? What is there right in front of us? What am I meeting in this moment? The person who just engaged with me, how am I meeting them? Am I meeting them within this ethical framework that I want to live my life by, right? And then we're noticing, right? We're noticing everything. Yeah. And we're noticing if we're spacious or not. And we're noticing what we might need to do to become more spacious if we're not spacious. And that requires that we're not absorbed in it, right? So like, I often have a picture of a duck. And if you see the ducks sometimes when they go into the water and they're like, their heads in and all you see is their tail. Sometimes you see their little feet. And I think that's really how often we are. We get absorbed and everything goes in and we have no spaciousness anymore. It's like we go on the water and we're just in that thing. And doing that is when we lose that ethical framework, right? That thing that we want to keep in mind, the ethics we want to keep in mind. The spaciousness to allow us to see what we're engaging with, if we're responding from something that is really not ours, or if we're responding from something that is so old and has nothing to do with the thing that's right in front of us. That's what mindfulness is when it's practiced. It's all of that, right? It's a noting, it's a framework, and it's not getting absorbed. So we're still we still stay in this ability to observe. So I like to show this slide about anger, because there's a teaching in Buddhist texts about the dog who, the person throws the rock at the dog and it hits the dog. And the dog, it doesn't go after the person. The dog goes after the rock. So think about that, because actually that's often how we are engaging in the world, is we're going after the rock and not the person who actually threw the rock. And in so doing, we aren't really getting at the root of the problems. And so this understanding of real deep transformation is this ability to get into the classroom and not get stuck on the rock. Yeah, to actually be able to look so deeply and know ourselves so deeply that we can see when we're getting caught up with that rock and forgetting what are the root causes of the things that we're really dealing with, engaging with. What do we really want our students and our people that we're working with, our community leaders, our thought leaders, wherever it is that we share learning with? What is it that we're trying to get at? Are we coming in this very superficial way? Or are we coming in with the depth, right? So I'm just going to remind you to this once to go ahead and notice what's there for you. Take a breath in. And so the work that we're really doing is in teaching to transform is activism, right? We're activists in different capacities on the spectrum of activism. It's a big old spectrum. But teaching is really activism if we're teaching to transform. Yeah. If we're teaching to in the context of an acknowledgement and an awareness that we're in this big system and we're teaching within it, right? And so we know that we are taking care of whatever it is, whatever humanities, public health, science, medicine, engineering, art, whatever. We're still in the same context, yeah. And that getting into that context and bringing that, being able to hold whatever the specificity of what subject matter we're teaching in this larger context is critical around the deep transformation, because really that's the difference between the rock and the person who threw the rock, right? And we're all socialized to stay with the rock. Very seldom are we applauded for going deeper. In fact, often the people who go deeper are the ones that are seen on the fringe, often the ones not receiving the accolades and the awards, the ones that say very safe. So I'm not encouraging anybody to go out there and tell off their boss or lose their jobs or anything like that, or not get your research grant funded or whatever, all the things. I am encouraging you to go deeper, because see, we have all co-created what we're in now. No one is excluded from what we're in right now. And so it requires all of us to really step up and look at how we're living this life, right? And so this is just some words about what activism and mindfulness might look like, right? Again, we get back to that ethical framework. What is it? Is it including racial and social equity? If it's not, something's wrong. It's gender equity, language equity, ability equity, class equity. Yeah, right? Because these things don't go away. Even when we go into our spiritual communities, these things do not go away. We want to think it goes away, but we're just this, amazing, beautiful human beings, bodies and hearts and souls. And we bring all of us everywhere we go, no matter where I go, there I am. Me and my stuff and me. So we practice, right? We practice whatever our spiritual framework is, we practice with it, right? So that we do that calm, that spaciousness, so we don't get caught up the absorption into the thing that's in front of us, so we lose that big picture. And this is everything. It's not just the mind, it's not just the thinking, it's the words that come out of our mouth, and it's our actions. So it's all that, yeah? Because even we all know that even sometimes when we're like saying nice words or doing the action that society expects, that the little thought that's going on in our mind is a very different thought. It may not be one that contains equity still. And so this transformation that we're talking about needs to involve body, speech, and mind. What am I thinking? And the more that we become aware of ourselves, the more we can see even beyond the superficial thought that's there, the root under it. Why do I keep doing that? Right? Why do I keep saying those things? What is under there? Yeah. Because this is where we have to root it up, get at it. Yeah. Thich Nhat Hanh says, mindfulness must be engaged. Once we see that something needs to be done, we must take action. Seeing and action go together. Otherwise, what is the point in seeing, right? So this mindfulness, it's not just this like, oh, I'm so cool. I'm like theming with the mindfulness vibe, right? It's a thing. I'm down with it. I mean, you can do all that. And mindfulness allows you to see more deeply. And with that seeing, what are you going to do with it? If you see more clearly, are you going to do something with it? Yeah. So in regard to our educational system, I wanted to just mention what we know as the first university in the world that's recorded, right? Like, I'm not going to get into like all the things that are not recorded through the ways that we accept recording to be. That's real. But in Morocco, North Africa, in the 9th century, a woman named Fatima al-Fihri set up the first university. And this university still exists today. And she set it up for people who were refugees coming from Sudan, other parts of Africa, and also some people coming from the southern part of Morocco to be able to take care of the things that were there, right? So the history, when you look at why we have education or higher education, it rests on this need to do things, to stay ethical, to wrestle with spiritual ethics and doctrines that we think will make us better human beings and contribute to the world in growing a better society, a more a society that helps each other, right? The first universities in college in the U.S. in Boston, it was about educating. The majority was about educating clergy, yeah. And so this is where education comes out of, yeah. This is the root of it, yeah. At least the way we remember it. And so and I'm not diminishing the kind of education that happens in a household, where children learn from parents and from their elders and their aunties and whatnot, their community leaders. But for this context of what we're speaking of, I just want to recognize that this system of education comes out of a very ambitious place, and I wonder and invite us to think about where we are today. And so here's a quote. I think most of you know where we are and where we're trying not to continue. Despite the effects of many individuals and groups within the formal educational system, education for a just and sustainable world is not a high priority. Indeed, it is the people coming out of the world's best colleges and universities that are leading us down the current unhealthy, inequitable, and unsustainable path. And this is from someone who runs a nonprofit. I can't remember where. Used to be a dean at Tufts, I think, and some other accolades. And so this is where we're at today, right? And that's why this transforming our educational system and teaching to transform is so critical, because we're at a real, we kind of created the mess that we're in. And so the co-creation of undoing it is critical, right? Okay. And so the teaching is always to ourselves first, right? That's the reflection, so that it's bringing out something to others that can really be beneficial. And the listening, right? The listening. So if we think about teaching as listening, listening to ourselves as we teach, even while others are listening to us, it really starts to shift this idea that we don't receive as well, right? It kind of shifts to this kind of mutuality, instead of this kind of hierarchy of I know best, I deliver, I have the knowledge. So when we listen to ourselves too, and we think about what are we doing, how are we teaching to transform, it really starts to shift, because in that teaching moment, I am learning about myself again. And I'm determining whether I'm going to repeat that or not, right? That's the awareness and the mindfulness. We're always in observation within this framework of ethics, right? And so the third part, the context, is injustice, right? So that's why I say they're all kind of interspersed together, but we're kind of trying to do a path here. I've been talking about the fact that the context is injustice. And so I want to focus in on this, because for those of you who might be thinking, what do you mean the context is injustice? I don't quite understand. What do you know about injustice? You get all those degrees. Surely you have no idea. The fact is that the context of the United States history is one of injustice. It was born on injustice. It's continued in injustice, and we're still in injustice, and we're going to continue it if we stay the course of what we're at, right? And the understanding is also that, to be quite frank, teaching about getting to justice is hard, right? So it's in the teachings, again, of Buddhism and Eastern philosophy, we tend to think that moving away from suffering is actually not suffering. But what happens when we start getting at the root of the problem, beyond the superficiality, and getting into the root of it, we start to really see what's really there. That's hard, okay? And so don't get it confused that, oh, I'm on this path of justice and healing, and so I'm good. It's going to be easy. No, I'm sorry. Healing is hard, right? And yet the suffering that comes from the path of healing is a different kind of suffering. It's one that we start having the tools to not suffer from, right? So I'm going to say that again. The tools that come from the path of healing, even though they may be suffering, it allows us to deal and be with the suffering in a very different way than before we gained those tools. Because before we had no tools, it was just suffering, right? Injustice, right? Okay, so in Buddhist philosophy, we'd say that this whole world is constructed, it's made up, right? And that it's the nature of human beings that have made it up. And so there's injustice, there's suffering, there's unrest, there's difficulty, there's stress, there's unease, right? We have to discover how we got there, y'all. because that's the only way we're going to figure out how to end it, right? So we have to look at the history. Now, this is hard, right? This is what I mean about the path to end suffering is hard, right? It's hard. And that's why we need these slides that have a moment for a breath to get fresh and open our hearts again. Because some of the things I'm going to talk about and I've been talking about, some of you are closing your hearts. I know this. Some of you are going like this. You may not physically bring your shoulders forward, but your heart gets hurt. You get tired. You get anxiety, you get traumatized. And so that slide, the blank one, it's an opportunity to notice that. And then the nature one, it's an opportunity to reconnect. That's something with something that's bigger and vast. The elements that are in us, to nurture that, open up, right? So we need these spaces of awareness, mindfulness, so we can stay on this work of justice, okay? So this is why we have to go back and look at the history. As difficult as it is, we have to heal it. And so we have to be prepared. We have to have the tools to do that. So let me read this for those who may not be seeing it. Instead of turning away from the unwanted, corrupt thought, one confronts it directly as an object, scrutinizes its features, and investigates its source. When this is done, the thought, word, or action quiets down and eventually disappears. For an unwholesome thought is like a thief. It only creates trouble when its operation is concealed, but put under observation, it becomes tame. Bhikkhu Bodhi. Okay. And so this idea of shining the light so we can see clearly, right? We have a lot of metaphors for that. Nothing grows in the light. Open it, right? Wounds, we open it when they're pussed over to get it clean and dried out, right? Many metaphors for why we need light. Okay, so we have created these separate unequal society. We all know this, I think, history created by political authorities and private interests. We are an uneven society, y'all, sorry. Supported by an ideology of oppressive hierarchies, okay? And that same set of leadership is what makes the policies, the social, political, economic, that results in the factors that determine how we're going to think, where we're going to live and work, access good health. Everything is determined, right? And those factors, these contribute to whether we're going to have equity or inequity, whether kids get to access class or health care, whether kids get to have recreation in their neighborhood or none at all, whether there's food access or food deserts or places of, now there's, I can't remember a new word instead of food deserts, forgive me. So I'm going to show you a couple of timelines. It's not for you to memorize and know everything, but it is important to just know that the United States was colonized, as we know it today, by a system of racialized structures, right? The creation of the country, as we know it today, has really been a plague of violence that has been affirmed, confirmed, and mediated by the government and private entities, elite private entities, okay? And so this timeline, it begins in the 1400s and the doctrine of discovery, and maybe some of you are familiar with that. That's global, right? That came to the United States, which was already existing in Europe, right? Catholics, and yes, we won't get into all that, but it just to show you that we have a difficult history, right? Enslavement, massacres of Native Indigenous people, Mexican-American War, the Immigration Act, the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? All this has happened, yeah? And there's all this other stuff that's on another timeline that sometimes when I teach with these maps, I can't put them all up because it's just too much to consume. You understand? Sometimes I block them out. I put little black boxes over them because it's so much, right? But this is our history and it's hard. And yet there's a way we need to be able to bring it forward and contextualize what we're teaching, especially if we're going to shift to transformate, real deep transformation. And especially in a time when our educational books and the way we teach are being put to the test as to what should be used to teach our children, right? This is another one. Now it's more populated. I moved some of the things from the very beginning and brought more things into the redlining, deindustrialization, mass incarceration, right? So what I'm trying to show, because I added the others, is that we're still doing a whole bunch of nonsense, right? Because we have this whole history that we've not taken good care of, not acknowledged, not healed, not repaired. And so unless we take good care, like the quote from Bhikkhu Bodhi, it stays in the dark. It's like a thief. Yeah. So you want to stop the thieving, you shed the light, it quiets down. It's transformed. And to make it a little more specific to public health, just these kinds of things that continue, you might say, well, today, how's that history matter? Well, besides that timeline I showed you, we just look at 20th century and 21st century in different ways that we've dealt with what we call drugs, illicit drugs, right? So we are living the history today, right? It's in our bones. We're living the history of those who deserve and have and those who don't. So in my specific work in Baltimore and around rebuilding and the uneven development and its health impacts, my work focuses on urban renewal, gentrification, the way it exists today, the way universities like Johns Hopkins, and not only Johns Hopkins, it's across the whole country, actually across the world, how universities grow on the backs of the surrounding community. Yeah. So here's East Baltimore, Middle East Baltimore, right next door, right? You throw a stone, there's this low-income Black community that has some of the highest health risk and health disparities. And I often, in different settings, I'll show some population level Baltimore City maps where we show the segregation that exists in the black butterfly and the white L. We actually call it that, the black butterfly and the white L, because we're geographically segregated in that way. And all the incidences of everything that you want to name occurs in the black butterfly. Yeah. And the struggle, right, to remedy that, right? So so it's not just the healthcare and the teaching, right? It's as the university rebuilds and builds itself bigger and bigger and bigger, does it employ the people who need jobs, right? And how do we contest that? As we take people's land. So this is land that Miss Williams and Reverend Simmons used to live. And now there is a park there in the biotech park of Johns Hopkins. And who gets to tell people when they can speak and say something is unfair? And so what we've done is, especially in urban areas, is we've gone from communities of what we would call pre-urban renewal area, urban model communities where people take care of each other, right? Social capital, social cohesion. And this continued serial displacement, the way we build uneven communities based on those factors mentioned, we now live in communities that are just collection of people, what we call nonsense, because we've broken all the depths of the connections with each other, right? And that has an impact, right? And if you look at the causal pathway, right, of all that, these continued ways that we build and rebuild communities, we have different models, and all the models bring different ways to assess it, investigate it, collect data, and talk about it. But the stress of these things is the causal, right? We have the psychological impact, the root shock effect from Dr. Fulilov, the traumatic response to losing one's ecosystem, the weathering effect from Dr. Geronimus, repeated exposure to these kinds of marginalization, and then the historical intergenerational trauma, right? Experience as a cultural group of people, right? All these things are part of our psyche. All of these things are things that as we teach and we're engaging with students, they're coming with much of this, depending on who we're teaching. But we must also know that even if we're teaching people who we think aren't impacted by these kinds of histories, there's something very, there's something abnormal about a society, a colonizing society, and the people who come out of that settler colonizer mentality and heritage. There's something that has impacted their hearts and health to allow this to continue, to see this happening, to drive by it every day, to walk by it every day, to see it on TV every day. There is something that affects the human heart to be able to allow that to happen. Now, I'm not trying to make anyone feel guilty or ashamed or anything. What I'm saying is that we're all affected by this history of racism, white supremacy, colonization, and its impact. We're all, in a sense, needing healing. Those who have suffered the force of oppression and those who have participated directly or indirectly in carrying that out. We are all suffering and we all need healing. And so whoever is in our classroom, we must teach to that transformation, for their transformation. And so we must understand our history, because without knowing that history, we will keep teaching at a very superficial level, and we're not going to transform and repair. Yeah. And so now we get to that fourth part, the emerging from this space, this fabricated space of separation that we've created, the suffering, right? So I like to show this map. This is a red line map of Baltimore City. Because I always like to remind people that structures don't build themselves, people build the structures, because it's very easy for us to stay with the institutional aspect of it and move away from like, what about me? What about the inter and the interpersonal, right? So I like to show this person behind this red line segregated map of Baltimore City. And by the way, you can find a red line map of every city in the country. This is redlining mean this is when the Federal Loan Association supported the banks in surveying all the cities to find out where Black people live and basically where white people live, drew maps, and in the red areas were where majority African American and new immigrants live, and then they wouldn't lend money to these people in this neighborhood. And in so doing, continue to create this huge disparity of wealth, health, and everything else. Okay. And people did that. Like there was someone who said, let's do this survey. There was someone who said, let's do this survey so we can make sure we lend the right people money. Let's do this. Let's co-create this. There's people who sat together and put their heads together and drank coffee and ate cookies and did this. We got to make it real, right? There's people involved. And so that's why it's so important for us to do that reflection, to do the pausing, to do the reflection, and to know how it's impacted us. Dr. King said that true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. And that justice is really love and calculation. Justice is love correcting that which revolts against love. So this is really important for us to remember when we think about this work of justice. This is not a work of attacking. This is not a work of making people have anxiety or re-traumatizing. This is not a work of overturning the apple cart or standing out or whatever. This is the work of love, right? Justice is really love in calculation. Justice is love correcting that which has revolted against love. It's so deep. It is so deep because it always comes back to the heart. And when we come back to the heart, we come back to who we are and what we feel we can do in this world. What is it that I'm about? Where is my heart? Is it so hardened? Audre Lorde, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. Right? How do we stay in love, right? How do we keep coming back? How do we keep softening our heart? Every time we go out and we meet things that make us hard, how do we soften again? When we go in the classroom and we hear things, how do we keep soft? How do we invite students to stay soft? What are we bringing into the space to model this transformation? How are we staying aware to the work of justice? Thich Nhat Hanh, history teaches that we die if we oppose the system. Yet many individuals continue to challenge the darkness, despite the danger in doing so. Those who pursue the truth are members of the community of truth seekers and reformers throughout time and space. They do not resign themselves to a collective fate that offers no laurels. So we are truth seekers, right? We will shine the light on the darkness so we can take care of transforming the suffering, the injustice. And part of that, taking care of the collective anger and pain, is taking care of our own anger and pain in ourselves and in our classroom. And if we think of this image, this beautiful image of that hardened wood, right? Clearly it's been there a minute, right? That's the anger, that's the pain that sometimes is so hard, it stays. And yet it's sitting in this vastness of fluidity. It's sitting in this spaciousness. And so what does that tell me? That tells me that there's opportunity always for transformation, that it doesn't have to stay in this way. So for the next few slides, I'm gonna not speak and invite you to enjoy the words and the images. And with that, I will finish up. Thank you all for your listening. I appreciate your attention.
I just want to thank you so much, Marisela, and everyone who's here still. I'm still like taking a deep breath right now and trying to actually feel that breath and realize how very little my breaths are actually deep, and just the moment to pause and be present and take it all in. Whew. So I hope you all are having that moment for yourself. And I want to offer just a little bit transition space that we do have some time for interaction, engagement, questions, conversation. So if you have something you'd like to ask, you can feel free to add it to the chat or to raise your hand, and we can use the raise your hand feature also. And we have some questions that we'd like to ask Marisela, but I also want to make sure that there's plenty of space and time for the community that we have here right now to engage. So you offered a lot in this. There was a lot that you offered in this session today. So much wisdom, so many quotes, stories, nuggets of wisdom, guidance, so many tactics. There's a lot. I am still on the early part where I'm still feeling that part where you said the pedagogy of pausing. I love that as a tool, as a practice to bring into many spaces, the pedagogy of pausing. Can you talk a little bit more about how you've become comfortable with that, but also how we have the confidence to advocate for it? Because we are immersed in a culture and in settings that love productivity, that reward producing over presence and being. And I often find that I have to somehow navigate the tension between offering that pause so that we may process, so that we may be present over being perceived as productive.
Yeah. I started using the pause for my own heart more than 10 years ago, when I was teaching around some of the work around the injustices here in Baltimore City, around the I was directly involved in a struggle around the displacement of over 750 Black families for a biotech park by Johns Hopkins. And when I would teach about it, I would start to get enraged again. And I would get choked up again. And I could see people in the audience. Some people would just disconnect, like they just couldn't handle it. Some people put their head down. It was just too much. Some people walked out. And I realized that for me to be an effective teacher, person sharing information, I needed to be present. So this pause wasn't, I sat there and thought, wouldn't this be cool? This came from this direct experience of I am not being effective. I am getting enraged. I'm getting, just like I was saying, my head was getting absorbed in the issue again, and I wasn't being effective. And I'm so happy for this practice of mindfulness, because I thought, wow, nature is so healing for me. When I go into nature, I feel it transforms me. And I said, oh, I'm going to put some pictures of nature in the slides. So I started like maybe one every 10 slides. And then and then eventually it came to one every 5. Initially, so this is like more than 10, 11, 12 years ago, no one would say anything about the nature slides, but I could see people, they weren't disconnecting as much. People weren't leaving because of the hard stuff, especially students of color. It's hard to talk about these kinds of displacement and continued demoralization of Black people and brown people, right? And then after a couple years, people would come up as others are asking questions, and they would just walk by me real quickly and they'd say, thanks for the flowers, thanks for the pictures of nature. And then I started hearing things like, it really helped me stay. And then I started doing the, of course, I put the scientist hat on and I'm like, okay, let me just collect some information and see what people are feeling. And then I started giving the pages and asking people to write down and actually say. And then I got to one point, and this was in a class of attorneys, student attorneys, right? One of the people raised their hand at the end and said, the flowers and nature was the best part of your presentation. I just cracked up. I was like, yes, you are on target, right? Because just think about that. Student attorneys, y'all, thinking that, that nature was the best part of a presentation on things that they're litigating and they're researching and doing work on, right? The legal facts of community development. So it's been a process. It's really, so that's my process. So that's the process. Now, how to do that in academia in the sense of this, someone put the culture of urgency. Absolutely. Right. And yeah, I can do it now, right? Because I have all these degrees and like, who's going to tell me I can't do it, right? Yeah, I'm owning my power. Absolutely. But that's the reason I went and got all these ridiculous numbers of degrees, is so I could do this. So I could if I want to put a flower in every other slide, I'm going to do it. And there's going to be very few people, because there are very few people who have as many degrees as me. And yes, I'm going to say that because it's true. And they're going to dare to tell me I can't do that. Because if you invite me to give a talk, I'm going to do it. And don't invite me, right? And I've turned down talks too, because I'm pretty clear about what I'm bringing forward, right? So yes, it's real. There is this productivity. There is this go, go, go. But I'm asking you, it doesn't take, what I tell students, I say, there is no excuse not to practice pausing. And I really mean that, because it doesn't take but 2 seconds to stop and take a breath. But we're so ideologically programmed to not stop, that we don't even know how long it takes to stop. So I'm going to say that again. We don't even know how long it takes to stop, because in our mind, we have married or equated stopping with non-productivity. And what I'm introducing here and I'm inviting you into is to do it yourself. So this was an experiment. You could have paused every time you saw nature. Some of you didn't want to pause. Why? Because you didn't want to miss anything. Yeah. My point is, and I forgot, I usually say this, don't worry, I'm going to continue with the same thing I was saying. You're not going to miss anything, y'all. Breathe in awareness, right? But we're so cultivated to think that if we stop for 1 second, 1 millisecond, we're going to miss that thing that we really need to do. And for folks of color, we have it even more, because we're always having to reach higher to get half as much, right? And that's real, and it's still real today, okay? And so even more, because we want to carry all of our folks on our shoulders, and we think that if we do pause, we're letting down all of our folks, because we carry that stuff, right? It's not ours to carry all, but anyway, we carry it. So we're even less likely to pause. What I'm saying, it doesn't take but 2 seconds to breathe in and breathe out. Yeah, in the middle of a lecture, breathe in and breathe out. You're teaching a class, just tell your class. In some places, right? I work in some places, y'all, where we don't even use the word meditation. We don't even use the word Buddhism. Yeah, you don't have to even use these words. Buddhists aren't the only people who breathe and notice. Breathing and mindful awareness of your breath's been there forever, right? Indigenous cultures, African cultures, all kinds of cultures, Christian, it's there, right? So I'm in spaces where I wouldn't say meditation, Buddhism, or anything like that. I don't even say mindfulness. I just say, let's ground ourselves, y'all, before a community meeting. Okay, let's ground ourselves. Everybody, do you want to close your eyes? It's okay. We're going to take some breaths in. Okay, notice your feet. Let's root down to ancestors. Let's bring ancestors into the space. Let's bring spirit into the space. That's a pause. But back to academia, I think they've just like scared us silly into thinking that taking 2 seconds every 15 minutes or so to take a breath in awareness in and out is going to make us not productive. In fact, all the data shows that when we clear our minds, that we're actually able to see in more distinct ways. We get to see the nuances that we wouldn't have seen because of the cloudiness of all the thoughts that are jumping back and forth, right? All the anxiety that might be there, all the stress and the anger. You breathe, you calm yourselves down, you go for a walk, you come back, go to the bathroom. Someone told me, yeah, I do it. There's no place where I don't want people to see me, so I go and sit in the toilet. They're like, why do you always go and sit in the toilet? Well, do what you need to do. Go and sit on the toilet. Who cares? Breathe on the toilet and then come back. And if you come back and you're more clear and you have something more brilliant to offer, then you can participate more fully in changing this world. But all clouded like that, you're optimal, you're not your best, because who you are is buried under all that movement, all that rapid thinking, all that rapid firing that's going on. So you want to get back to that brilliance of who you are. You're going to have to unravel it. It's covered up. Yeah.
Yeah. I wish Zoom would create a snaps feature of our reactions, something that's snaps and absolutely everything you said. And I'm taking deep breaths as you're talking. It's almost as if we have to remind ourselves. Thank you. I think, is there anyone who wants to pose any questions at this point? We want to invite you to offer a question, something you're grappling with, while we have the time, attention, and wisdom of Marisela Gomez. I just would like to say one of the comments in the chat. I'm not sure if I'm going to say the name correctly, but from maybe Yang Fing, maybe. They thanked Dr. Gomez and said that may these truths resound for the benefit of all beings. Thank you. I thought that was a really, truly beautiful comment. And speaking of truths, one of the things I did want to ask is that in our roles as inspiring, emerging, lifelong truth seekers and truth tellers, there often comes with that also the risk of exposure for being that. I've been in spaces where there's only 1 or 2 people willing to be a truth seeker or truth teller openly, tell openly in these meetings, in these learning spaces, that there's a hesitancy, and I understand why. And wanting to talk a little bit more about how we build that muscle for truth telling, and what are the things that help protect us either against that exposure or bring more people into that space of being willing to take that risk.
Yeah, it's a great question. I find that that there's a way that honesty, the energy of honesty and presence actually brings people in, right? So and when I say honesty and presence, I'm paralleling that with what you're asking about, speaking up the truth. So I find that when we do that from a place of heart, like this intention around justice and kindness and equity, that there's an energy level we've created with that. There's an energy, yeah. And people there in the room, they're in different places. So some people can speak up. Some people are more afraid. Some people have like real things on that they fear they may lose. Some people are just not there, like they don't have that awakened spaciousness yet, right? But what I find is that those who are there, but maybe in a space yet not yet where they can like maybe verbalize out, they know you. And even though they may not speak up in their around you initially in that public space, they find you, right? And if you allow yourself to be open, you will feel that connection, you will feel that support. And eventually, when people can trust that that's genuine, they feel, because it's about community, right? It's about feeling safe in saying who you are. And so once people start noticing and there's this kind of energetic connection, people will speak up more. This has been my experience. I've been in many spaces where I've been the only one to say something that no one else would say, especially when I was at Hopkins. Yeah. And yet, every single time I would say something where in public no one else would say anything, every single time I would walk away, people would come afterwards and say, thank you for what you said, or I really appreciate what you said, or do you have a minute to talk out here? And so this is why I'm saying people are in different places of how they can share out what is in their heart. We don't know how they learned, and what's been watered in them as to how much they can say and where. And so we have to take it in stride. Yeah. And sometimes you just have to invite folk, you just have to say, anybody here feels like I do, or something similar. You just got to invite folks to step in. Or sometimes I've even said, those of you who can't do it here, because like I've been in some spaces where I know people aren't going to say anything because of who's in the room. And I'll say, after I leave here, I'll be hanging out by my car for a few minutes. If you have something to share with me, meet me out there. And people come because they're in different spaces. Yeah. And then there's those who aren't there yet. And then we have to be gentle and allow them to get there at their pace, and we can even say, you've got to wake up. Like me, I think I was pretty direct in saying we all have to participate. We've all made this. And basically what I was saying is, you got to do your share. You got to lift your load. You got to wake up, people. So you can also encourage people in a way where they don't feel threatened and they still feel supported.
I'm not sure. It looks like Atia might have froze. Whether she did,
Sorry, I'm here. I just wanted to thank you so much again, Marisela Gomez, and I'm going to pass it over to Todd, who's going to round us out today.
Great, thank you. Yes, I would also just like to say thank you again, Marisela, for your truly inspiring words for us. We're so grateful to have you here sharing in this virtual space with us today and for those really wonderful words of wisdom and insight. And also very big thanks to Atia Thurman from the Brown School for leading this panel with Dr. Gomez and for your thoughtful questions and discussion. And I want to thank, of course, everybody for joining us today, for staying, and for your wonderful contributions to the event. Just quickly, I want to say a couple more words about this lecture series and our mindfulness working group. I'm Todd Braver in the Psychological and Brain Sciences Department here at WashU, and I'm a core member of the group. And Deanna mentioned our working group at the beginning, and our group was founded on the idea that there are many individuals working across both campuses and many schools at WashU who share a core interest in mindfulness and our belief that it can play a vital and positive role both in the university and in the wider St. Louis community. And if you're interested in learning more about our group, you can find out more information on our website. I'm putting that in the chat right here. And we're thrilled that with the support of the CRE2 and also the Brown School, we not have been able to organize and sponsor the Mindfulness and Anti-Racism lecture series, but we've also made a significant component of our working group to increase visibility around this critical topic. We've curated a set of resources and materials for interested folks to learn more, and they're available on our website, so you can look for that. And our group is looking for ways to enhance our community engagement to increase the accessibility of mindfulness to the wider St. Louis community, particularly for underrepresented groups. And our group is highly inclusive. We're always looking for new members, new partners who want to join us. So if you think that's you, please contact us through our website, and we can put you on our mailing list and invite you to our regular meetings. And our website is also a resource to find out about mindfulness sessions offered at WashU. For example, amazing Deanna Para offers Learn at Work trainings through the Academy for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And there's a link here I'll put in that you can find out about that. And also there's Healing Ourselves and Wellness sessions, which are a collaboration between Meg Kresge, mindfulness consultant, and Aaron Stamp at the Office of Diversity and Equity Inclusion. And those are open to everyone as well. There's a link for that. And finally, if you enjoyed our lecture today and want to learn more, please join us again in the spring. We're going to be continuing our series. We're still in the process of selecting a next speaker, but we know that the talk will be in person, but with a live stream option as well. And if you do have a suggestion for speakers, if you know outstanding people that you'd like to hear, drop us a line, let us know, and we'll be publicizing that through CRA2 and our WashU Assembly series website. So keep an eye out for that too, and it'll also be appearing on our web link itself. So with that, I'll close out the session for today. Once again, deep bow of gratitude and thanks to our speaker and to our Pia for questions, and thanks to all of you for attending. And goodbye. Best wishes to everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marisela. I'm going to stop the recording.